This is episode number 33 of the Binmucker podcast. Today we have Alex Story on. Thank you for taking some time to join the pod.
Glad to be here, man. Episode 33. Wow.
Yes, sir. Started this bad boy in 2020, and despite a few breaks here and there, we're still going.
Yep, still just persisting in error. Refuse to be put down. I like that.
Yep. So tell me, what books you've been reading lately?
You know, since I graduated, I've kind of laid off the books a little bit. It's been really nice, like not reading every day. But I have been reading a book that one of my thesis advisors recommended, and it's pretty good. It's called Hidden Valley Road. It's about a 12-person family. They have I think they have 10 kids, maybe it's 8 kids, I can't remember. But all of them have schizophrenia. So the book is about exploring like genetic transmission of schizophrenia and kind of the history of the disease, and this family's place and kind of like understanding how schizophrenia develops in certain individuals and not in others, and how it's kind of passed down. I'm only like 50 pages in, but so far it's pretty good.
That sounds really interesting. And schizophrenia, I don't know. It, as I understand it, I could be very off here. It's kind of when your mind kind of starts deteriorating and you kind of lose sight of reality and start hallucinating, or I mean, who knows what it's like to experience it unless you're really going through it. But am I correct in that, or am I a little off in what the disease is?
I think that's pretty much the gist of it. I mean, a lot is still not very I mean, a lot remains to be found out about that disease. It's still like, I don't know. I wouldn't say like the research is in its infancy by any means, but they're still learning a lot about it. But yeah, I think a lot of people misunderstand schizophrenia as they equate it with split personality disorder or borderline personality disorder. So a lot of people think that those with schizophrenia like just have a whole array of alters that they have no control of. But schizophrenia in reality is pretty much what you said. It's the book like has a good way to describe it. It's like someone with schizophrenia is like processing and perceiving reality and information that only they can recognize as real. So basically, yeah, you're like, there's a, I guess, operative consciousness that completely splits off from, I guess what we would call a normal one, whatever the fuck that is.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess
a lot of simulation. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, there was a guy in the program when I was at Boulder who said he had schizophrenia, and I'm not like, I don't want to like doubt that guy or anything, but he was like a remarkably fucking like proficient and lucid schizophrenic. Like I was around him a good amount, and I never really, you can never really like viscerally tell he was hallucinating or disassociating or whatever. But yeah, very very enigmatic, weird, pretty horrible disease. But yeah, I'm still reading that book, so about 200 pages left. But yeah, it's pretty good.
No, that sounds really interesting. I didn't know. I guess that makes sense. That can be something passed on to your children if you have schizophrenia, and obviously, like you said, a ton to be learned. But yeah, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of coincides with one of the last classes I took at Boulder was disability studies, and a lot of like the archaic thinking about disability, and I think with schizophrenia as well, is that like those type of mental afflictions or ailments are products of like fucking divine punishment, or you know, like just very like kind of fucked up explanations. But this one, I mean, discounts that pretty totally. But anyway, have you been reading anything lately? Are you
Yeah, I was gonna say, you know, I've been trying to read a lot more recently, and especially starting to read stuff that I enjoy. And I think it's been super educational, but also it's been so it's like so nice. Like it's such a good feeling finishing a book. It's like you read something in a book, and there's so many times I've gone, damn, like that's really interesting, or I never looked at it that way. And I feel like kind of what's wrong with a lot of not only our education system here, but in a lot of places is kids are just kind of forced to read stuff that they don't want to read. They're not passionate about. They're being forced to read. And I mean, it's kind of the same with a lot of things like exercise too. But when you read stuff that you enjoy, man, it is so it's such a great feeling.
It is, yeah. It's very satisfying. I think the hard part is just figuring out what stuff you like to read. A lot of those titles are kind of deceptive. So I mean, summarizing or like forming a review, reading a good review of a book can be like very, very helpful. But that's good to hear.
No, that's a good point. I recently finished Atlas Shrugged, and it took me forever, but just slowly but surely I chipped away. And
Well, it's a classic.
yeah, no, I'm honestly upset no one taught me it in high school because that book was awesome. Like,
There's like, yeah, that one, and like there are a couple more like Brave New World, even like 1984 that I would have thought we might have read in high school, but I guess, I mean, I know I didn't. I figure a lot of people did, but I never
I,
read those.
I've heard of 1984, and it was actually what I wanted to ask you about next. Is what do you make of all the censorship we're seeing nowadays, especially on platforms like Twitter and others? And it,
I mean, yeah, I read 1984 last summer for the first time, so it was it was fantastic. And then I watched the film version a few weeks after, and I mean, it's become like horribly like cliche and kind of hackneyed to call things Orwellian. But in reality, I think a great deal of what, yeah, a great deal of what he talks about, I think has come to pass in kind of different forms. But as far as like surveillance goes, as far as like thought crime goes, I mean, we're not very far off from that. But one of the most horrifying things about 1984 to me was the complete and utter like perversion of language, what they call newspeak in the book. So instead of saying something is like fantastic, they'll just simplify it and say it's double plus good or something like that. Like just completely fucking horrible. Like, and I think that's probably the one. That's probably the one facet of the book, or that reality that he's describing, that I see today more than in any other. And I hate that, but yeah, he was very, like totally a prescient book, and you know, I'd obviously recommend it or whatever. The movie's also very good, but it's pretty fucking bleak. It's pretty
yeah,
fucking bleak.
no, I feel like I saw the movie, and you're right about like language and the way it can be used to manipulate and coerce the population, or the masses, if you will. And the example I've heard is like North Korea, and they just like don't have words for some things, just because it makes it harder for them to communicate and rise up. And that shit is scary. Like the whole idea of being woke or cancel culture, or so much of it. It seems like in some cases can just lead to, rather than equality, just reverse racism, or unjustly canceling people who are critical thinkers and have a reason for looking harshly on society or the elites of the world, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, it in the film and definitely in the book, it's like there's some kind of like foundational or kind of like third party kind of vantage point that like has to remain something, like it has to remain intact in order for like any form of resistance or subversion to even take place, if there is like a dominant ideology or hierarchy at work. And I think what we're seeing today and probably increasingly in the future is, I mean, ideology is kind of like saturating the fucking airwaves, and it's hard to get around it. But eventually, I think that it comes down to like semantic drift. So the meaning of words shift, and you have two people conversing, both of which are using the same word, but one word means something completely different based on who's saying it to the other. So there is no longer like that kind of communicative middle ground where like you can have any semblance of, you know, civilized debate or discussion about anything and expect to make progress. So it's kind of depressing, but I don't really know how you combat that. I don't really know what you do about that. So
I got to read this. I feel like I sent it to so many people. It was like something about like your daily dose of white pill.
wait, isn't that like white pill's like hope, isn't it? Isn't it like
Yeah, exactly. But I gotta. Oh, where did I send this? I got it somewhere here on Twitter. It's so good. I got to go to my likes and find this thing, man, because this thing was cracking me up today. But I think it's got a lot of validity to it.
I think I watched a video a while back about the white pill. So I was like, what the fuck is that? And it seems like a very, I mean, I would call it idealistic or optimistic, but there does seem to be good reason for there to be genuine hope. But you know, I'm not a huge fan of that. But I will say it's become a lot easier to think and kind of perceive things more independently now that I've been off Twitter since like July. So, and I'll tell you, it's done fucking wonders for me. I definitely recommend that.
I was just gonna say I spend way too much time on Twitter, and I need to get on. And it's such a catch-22 because I know it's like just a bad dopamine feedback loop to keep checking Twitter. But at the same time, like some of the shit posting that goes on Twitter, or some of the shit the algorithm feeds me, man, is so good. Like it's so good.
Yeah.
There's also stuff I see, and I'm just like, it just like irks me. I'm like, this can't be real. Like we're living, you know. But anyways, I found the picture, and I'll attach it in the editing after the fact. But let me read it out now. Want to know something hilarious? And keep in mind, like this is some random anonymous person on 4chan or something. This isn't coming from me, but
okay.
This is from Anon. Want to know something hilarious? They have no idea what to do with you autistic fucks. Literal master's degree holding feds have debates, PowerPoints, talks, de-escalation training, and containment of negative thought exercises to de-radicalize agents that lurk here and elsewhere. I've been to the briefs. It's actually the reason I quit. They're so unbelievably incompetent and retarded that actual counter meme plans were drawn up in war game. I shit you not, middle-aged men were thinking of ways to make Pepe the Frog gay, so Nazis wouldn't want to use it anymore. They have nothing outside of blatant censorship. They have lost. They can't do anything about you all. The only semi-smart thing they did was start accusing everyone of being a Fed so they could trip up online movements from turning into actual demonstrations. That's it. That's all they've come up with in the years of lurking. To recap, they can't meme. They can't hire tranny therapists to help their poor radicalized lurking shit posters. They want to turn Pepe gay. They literally have no idea how to stop you, Optimus, from memeing them into defeat. It's hilarious. Remember, every shit post that makes them look like idiots actually infuriates them. Never stop.
Yeah, it's those autistic fucks, man. They're gonna save us. They don't know what to do with those guys. Yeah, that's pretty funny.
I mean, I'll say that Pepe the Frog has just brought so much joy to me. Like that meme kills me.
Yeah, who would have fucking thought? Who could have possibly fucking foreseen that?
And I mean, obviously, like that's an anonymous source on 4chan. Who knows? Like, if someone just typing that, or if that actually was an expert. Like, obviously, but if that is true, if that is true, that like I can't believe that would be thought of as a solution to get Nazis to stop using Pepe the Frog to try and.
No, they're desperate, but I mean, if they did manage to do that, that just might do it. So you never know.
If they're takeaway, humans are very irrational and crazy creatures.
They tend to be pretty irrational, but I think there's something to be said for that. And I think there's something to be said for like the way that we associate certain ideas and beliefs with even fucking like images of cartoon frogs and shit like that. Like what like inordinate power that fucking frog has. It's insane. I mean, certain like hand gestures and like symbols, signs, things like that. I mean, the connotation and the associations that they have are fucking like comically far-reaching and sometimes like wildly complex. But I mean, the extent to which people actually know how deep those things go, I can't really speak to that. But it is fucking hilarious. It's absolutely fucking hilarious.
No, it is, and I think I talked about this with a buddy. Like, I think the dominance the United States has on memes is a huge advantage to us as a country. As like ridiculous as that might sound, especially as AI becomes ever more apparent in our lives. Like I said, memes can become viral so quick and spread around the world and have such a profound meaning in so many different complex ways to so many different people. And it's honestly great to see that. Like, I feel like Pepe the Frog has become a huge meme in the Bitcoin community. And I think partly like, I think he's honestly, Pepe the Frog has done more good for the Bitcoin community than a lot of people. There's a lot of great, there's nothing to get, like there's a ton of great people in the Bitcoin community, in my opinion, but I think Pepe the Frog is arguably one of the greatest people in it. And just the way he can bring us together is a very real thing, in my opinion.
That's remarkable. It's totally remarkable. And like humor, and especially in the form of like, you know, modern memes and shit like that, they can be pretty effectively subversive. You can't really do anything about that. I mean, laughter is involuntary, whatever the fuck. I mean, I don't even know the extent to which that is true, but yeah, it's something about laughter and comedy that kind of like can transcend a lot of those boundaries that might otherwise keep people completely separated. But
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I'm pretty sure laughter, and I could be wrong on this, but I think laughter came to be as a way to like relax the awkwardness between people, and like it was like a biological thing to make it easier to interact with others. So, like you say, it's a very connecting type force.
Totally. Yeah, I think it can be very unifying, and it seems to be pretty like naturally contagious in some cases, but it can also be like wildly fucking isolating and kind of alienating if people are laughing and you don't know why, or if you are like the only person laughing and like like laughing hysterically in a certain context, it can be kind of off-putting to some people, but it can go both ways.
Since its creation, I'm sure it's advanced, but very true. So tell me, that's pretty a lot of respect for getting off Twitter, and I think I need to look into something like that. So I just spend less time on the app. But how are you consuming media nowadays? Especially, I agree with you. There's so much. It's hard to skirt around the mainstream narrative, whatever that approved narrative is for the day.
Yeah, I didn't realize this until I was off it for probably a month or so, but I got so much actual news from Twitter, whether it be in the form of memes or comedy or something like that. I mean, the way that they present actual like ostensibly factual information, it's very easy to like receive and interpret and kind of like look at it face value. But since I got off of it, I don't watch TV really. I mean, I didn't have a TV in Boulder, and I don't really watch TV anymore because I don't know. Every time I mean, this is digressing, but it's hard for me to consume like much media at all these days. I won't lie. I'm on Facebook occasionally, and I have no qualms about giving Zuck all of my fucking personal data. I don't really care anymore. But beyond that, beyond that, I don't know. I think certain events and certain like, I don't know, people, whatever is considered newsworthy, if it is of a certain magnitude, or if it is like deemed, critically important in some way, it'll reach you in some form, regardless of how like removed you want to be, unless like you're literally like secluded in the fucking wilderness and those people are, making sure that those types of things don't reach them. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I've like become a real like fucking isolationist. It's like so wildly liberating to not give a fuck about that shit anymore. And it's also a profound luxury not to give a fuck about that shit until it actually is like at your front door. But that's a different story.
No, that's a really good point. I'm with you too. Like I feel like it's almost hard to watch like our attention spans, like just from being on Twitter and other social medias. It's like it's hard to find something worth watching. I feel like now because we're so what's the word? The shock factor of everything is just so diminished. And honestly, the biggest forms of media I've been consuming is podcasting and my own, but mostly other people's, like Lex Fridman, Joe Rogan. Like if you look at the numbers, it's amazing how many listens Joe Rogan gets per podcast versus like what mainstream media. He's crushing them. He's blowing them out of the water. And I feel like it's because people are starting to, especially with the web now, you can like be, interact and talk with your favorite people. They call them influencers nowadays, but B-list celeb, whatever you want to call them. Now people can interact, and like I think less and less people just want to watch TV. And still huge in sports games. There are still a ton of great TV shows, but I think it's slowly changing. I think for the better too, because I think it's kind of cool that people can just have a conversation, start up their own podcast, do whatever, listen to almost anyone, and kind of gives the little guy a voice in a way.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think that type of, I guess, that type of media where it's, if you're listening to conversations or even if you have the chance to interact with people who are having a conversation, I think it, I wonder about this because I have a hard time determining whether or not like those types of forums where there's like the prospect of active engagement on behalf of like the listener. I don't know if that's like illusory or it's actually legitimate. I mean, in terms of podcasting and things like that, I wonder to what extent like public taste, perception, and feedback actually influences the content that ends up on these like huge broadcasting forums like fucking Joe Rogan. I mean, I think I heard recently like just how many people listen to his episodes or how many views he gets per month, and I was fucking absolutely astounded at that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It could be just we have the impression for some reason that we have more of a voice and a say and a presence in what we are watching and consuming. But I think the wider issue here is like its subject position. It's like, I think entertainment, current media, and I think like the direction that it's going is going to perpetuate like the classic subject position of like passive reader or passive watcher and active text. So it's like we are receiving. We're not really like giving shit out or contributing to it. I mean, there are certain ways to do that. I just think it's incredibly difficult, especially without fucking like selling out to some extent. But yeah, I don't know. It's really hard to verify.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think there are some people who can do it interactive, but I think when you get too big, it's just so hard not to sell out. And I think part of the reason, and I mean, he's gotten paid bank, but I feel like at least as a listener, you kind of feel like at least you get the sense that, in my opinion, when I'm listening to Joe Rogan, it's like, oh, this guy hasn't sold out. He's like being real with his audience. He's just having a convo. Whenever I watch anything on the news, I'm like, this shit is so curated. Like, I never watch it because it's just like, this is so clearly pushing an agenda, so biased. It's like a quick segment, like, let's go. And I have the most respect for people who can grow their audience, and it doesn't even have to be interactive, but just don't sell out and are able to have honest, and everyone has their own biases and agenda, but at least like and as open-minded of a discussion as possible with their guest on a podcast, rather than pretty much everything else you see on the mainstream news networks nowadays.
Yeah. I don't, yeah, I don't fucking know. It's like I said, it's just hard to actually know what the fuck. I mean, I think like as an independent, if you have an independent like podcast, for example, and like you do grow it like considerably, if it, you find success and things like that, I think you can persist in like whatever like vision or approach you're taking to dialogue or conversation, or you're talking about issues, whatever, like however you're trying to structure the forum. I think eventually when you hit a certain point, and I think Joe Rogan is the exception to this otherwise rule or exception to the norm. There are these like just undeniable forces that come into play, whether it be like monetary or whether it be like political, things like that end up adulterating content that might have been previously perceived as a lot more pure. Whether or not it actually is, I don't know. But it's hard to say. But it is impressive that I think that Joe Rogan has maintained a pretty consistent tone. And I also respect him for doing that, but it can't be denied also that there are like legions and legions and legions of people that are absolutely that despise that man and everything that he does. I'm not entirely familiar with what precisely they don't like about him, but there are scores of people who vehemently despise what he does and what he stands for. So I don't know. It's tough, but I mean, for him, he's big enough to where it doesn't fucking matter. He has a listener base big enough to where he can keep perpetuating himself.
Yeah. And I'm very grateful for that, because I think he's done wonders to help the United States stay true to the ethos of this country with individual sovereignty and liberty and life, justice for all, the whole. And I just had a brain fart. What was I going to say?
I mean, I think there. I mean, I'm trying to think about this in like a macro kind of perspective, and I think like somebody like Joe Rogan and his kind of podcast, I guess you could call it. I wouldn't even call it traditionalist really, but there are certain values that are perceived to be associated with American culture that might be more traditionalist. So you have like, and he's become a massive force in that direction. So you have people like Joe Rogan, and then you have people, on the complete opposite side of the political spectrum, and there are both of these like very, very like almost indomitable forces that are kind of like maintaining this balance, or ideally maintaining a balance, but it might be not as actual. I mean, it's impossible to have perception on these things. It's like you're gaslighting yourself trying to think about this shit.
I just remembered what I was going to say. To your point about like the fact a lot of people hate Joe Rogan and you don't really know why. I think it's because hey, Miss Story, tell your mama say hi. But I think a huge reason that people hate Joe Rogan is because, and it talked about this in Atlas Shrugged, they'd rather be lied to than admit the fact that they've been lied to. And I think that's what a big part of it is, because, and I'm not against the vaccine, but all Joe Rogan has basically stated is he got COVID, he recovered, so he has natural immunity. He doesn't want to get a vaccine since he has natural immunity and was able to beat the virus. And that goes against the mainstream narrative of like, we're going to mandate this vaccine. And obviously we'll see what the Supreme Court says on it. But I think there's I would love to know why we haven't looked into natural immunity and why more mainstream news outlets aren't talking about it. And the fact that Joe Rogan kind of stood up to them and said like, he used ivermectin. He brought on Dr. Peter McCullough to talk about it on his podcast. Like, and it's clearly had some positive effects and been used effectively by various doctors around the world. And yet CNN, the mainstream news network, is talking about the fact that he's taken horse dewormer to try and they're graying out his picture. Like,
yeah,
it's
I
not.
mean that with a lot of what I've seen with like mainstream narratives about COVID, especially, is like places or like outlets like CNN and other like very, very, very like pro vaccine, pro kind of like follow the fucking rules types of like distribution chains are like, they have a monopolization on what they it's like, if safety is an issue, if lives are at stake, or at least they can give off the impression that lives are indeed at stake, it's like there is no need to justify anything else. Like if they can actually like create and kind of perpetuate a sense of danger that is so exigent that like considerations of like personal liberty and autonomy and things like that go out the window. I don't know. I think this is the case all the time. I mean, this is how like martial law is created, and this is how like civil liberties come to be suspended. But they're like, I don't know. It just seems like far more weight for those who are like just like obstinately pro-vaccine. Far more weight is put on like safety and wellness and things like that, because they've been told that there is a like very singular route to that desired state. There is a very singular route to safety. And now we're seeing like the vaccine doesn't really, guarantee against infection. And we have like Omicron, and like the testing doesn't even really pick up Omicron. So I think like the public is becoming like wildly frustrated with what they're being told, like, and what's being broadcasted across these channels, whether it be pro or anti-vaccine. But I'm just so sick of the goddamn like politicization of safety and wellness and health and things like that. It's I don't know. It's fucking nauseating. And it's like I think large part why I can't like stand watching fucking media and commercials anymore. It's just the ideology just fucking just beams right through fucking all of the little like idyllic fucking like picturesque, representations of American life and culture. It's total fucking perversion, and it makes me sick.
Bro,
a lot of the time.
You are so spot on. I was reading a book today about running, and it was talking about how the guy was like, I don't see your doctor before doing a fitness activity, because realistically, especially with Western medicine, it's like you're going to go and your doctor can say one of two things, like, yep, checks out, like nothing feels wrong. All right, you can exercise, like don't overdo it. Or like maybe you have these underlying conditions you shouldn't exercise. And I think so much of Western medicine is just like keeping an eye on someone's health, and like if it ain't broken, don't fix it. Like and so much of I think really being a healthy person comes down to focusing on your fitness and getting exercise and getting outside, getting sunlight, trying to eat healthy. And I feel like so many of the products today, especially in the West, and it's just consumerist bullshit that doesn't add much value. Like there are so many zombie companies and jobs that just don't do anything. And I feel like capitalism has become very perverse, because the money is broken. I mean, the Fed printed $7 trillion since COVID hit. And I don't think we ever really fixed that many things after 2008. We just kind of papered over the cracks with money printing. And I think a lot of the rest of the world is starting to wake up to the fact that the US dollar as a global reserve currency benefits us. And I mean, the fact that we have $29 trillion in debt, yet other countries are still willing to trade with us, is just a huge indicator that we're definitely rigging the system in our favor and fucking over a lot of less developed countries. And obviously I'm biased because I've started to learn about it. I really like it. But I think Bitcoin can be a huge tool for freedom, and honestly to help the states kind of beat the CBDC that China's trying to promote in their own country. And I'm sure they'd love to see it implemented elsewhere.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think, just talking about the commodification of health itself. And I was, and this keeps going back to, my God, that goddamn disability studies class. But a lot of what we talked about in there was, I mean, we do student presentations like the last few weeks of class. And this one girl gave a pretty good presentation where we watched a documentary about like plastic surgery or some shit. And I'll just ask you, what country do you think like has the most instances of plastic surgery procedures per capita?
The United States.
You would think, but it's fucking Lebanon. It's like Lebanon and then like Brazil and then I think a couple more than the US. But
Wow.
the wider point of the documentary was in a lot of places where like Western culture has taken like a pretty strong foothold, there are these created casts of kind of like ideal aesthetic beauty and things like that. But I think that like aesthetic beauty has actually come to be completely and inseparably incorporated from the idea of wellness and the idea of health, to where like we have to consider mental health and things like that. But it seems like aesthetic beauty and one's kind of like consideration of their own aesthetic beauty is completely tied into this false idea of what mental health is. It's like I have to conform to this certain idealized cast of beauty, and I think Western beauty standards are largely responsible for that. But point being, a lot of pretty much a lot of capitalism thrives on human insecurity, and we can't really do much about that. But anyway, I was probably getting away from the point of the crash of 2008 and shit. But
Well, no, it's not. I mean, think about like, why do we have Facebook or Twitter for free, or YouTube? And a big part of the reason, I mean, the reason we have it for free is because we are advertised to constantly. The fact that, and it's probably less than 1%, because like I do believe, like you said, most people are just tuning advertisements out. Like I'm with you personally. Like I see an ad come on, I don't even. It's just so, like maybe 1 out of 100 ads. It's like, oh, that was funny. The rest of them, it's like, just this is so cringe. I don't want to see this. But we are afforded these services because we get advertised to constantly, and these algorithms get better and better and better at recommending us ads. And so it's like such a bitch, because so many of those things advertised to us are scams or shitty products or just consumer bullshit, not actual things that not actual things that I think are quality goods that actually benefit the greater good of society, if you will.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I think it preys on dynamics of desire, and like Lacan, and a lot of like Lacan and psychoanalysis talks about how desire is like we are constantly circling around what we want. I mean, desire. I mean, some thinkers and people believe that desire is ultimately what make us human. We have like use value and we have exchange value. And if you consider like an animal, for example, an animal only. I mean, well, yeah, we can use an animal. So an animal knows its basic needs, like hunger, for example, and that's a pure state of desire. That's actually what he would call drive. Like it is just we have to satisfy this need, and it is like direct nourishment. But what and for the human being, we're only in that state of pure drive before we enter language. So basically, as infants, so like when we're born, we only know one real drive or desire, and that's hunger. And once we enter language, and once we get caught up in the fucking symbolic chain, we are just constantly slaves to this non-existent thing we know as desire and want, where we are constantly circling this thing, this fucking illusion, or this central kind of like point without ever getting there. And like every time like we get close to achieving it, this wonderful feeling of like anxiety sets in. It's like we either come too close to achieving what we believe we want, or if we stop desiring, if we stop wanting for 2 seconds, we start to feel kind of like uneasy with ourselves, because we are so accustomed to like constantly chasing after and desiring things blindly and impulsively. It's like if you actually stop and like consider that, it's like it can be a little disquieting, I think.
Yeah. I mean, think it wasn't that long ago that most humans, all they thought about was their id, like that constant desire to feed themselves. They didn't know where their next meal was coming from. And now that modern day society has allowed us to extend our time preference. At least if you want to be successful in today's modern day society, you really have to extend your time preference, especially with the rate of inflation in this country. Like you have to be able to invest. You have to set your time preferences long. you have to think it very long. And as humans, that's not what we're designed to do. We're designed to fulfill the biggest desire in our mind, which typically has been food. But once that, it's like that hierarchy of needs pyramid. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of the very wealthier, and not all of them, but I think a vast majority of wealthier elite peoples have so many of their basic needs met
Yeah.
that they get a lot of perverse and twisted. I don't
Totally.
even know what you want to call it. But I think all those needs being met leads to some fucked up shit.
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And what the psychoanalysts would call that, or what at least Lacan and Zizek would call that, when they'd call that surplus enjoyment. They'd call this French word jouissance, which I there are like so many, like, to talk about this is like fucking like irredeemably gay and like cringeworthy. But I mean, it's what it is. I mean, I tend to like that shit. And I see it everywhere. But yeah, totally. And your example there about someone who feels like they need to they might have a desire. So like as Americans, we have, I mean, to what extent the American dream is still intact, I don't know, but I think most Americans have kind of an idealized goal to where they want to achieve. Perhaps, you know, we have a 401k, we have a pension. There will come a time where if I work hard, if I, you know, extend my hours, if I work my ass off, that I will be able to achieve this state of, you know, apparently like happiness, leisure, just pure enjoyment. And it's cruel and kind of fucked up, because you spend, I mean, countless people spend their entire lives working their asses off and doing the things that they perceive will get them to that end goal, that by the time they reach there, that point, it's like it either vanishes or it's cost them so much along the way that like whatever that end point is very often becomes lost. Or you could be like lucky or beneficial enough to actually like convince yourself of the illusion along the way and actually get there and not give a fuck. But I think for some people that's easier to keep down.
No, and think about it. That's why I believe societies who haven't had hard and sound money, societies where the people who save get punished, they end up collapsing because the motivation, that long time preference in modern day society, if the means of being able to afford yourself or work towards that just becomes increasingly difficult to the point where someone's going to be like, screw it, like, I'm done with this. I think that's why you see a lot of societies collapse. And I think a lot of times it goes back to the money. And, it's so unfair for like to think, the money we put into Social Security, will we ever see that? I hope so. But like, it's looking like they're going to run out here soon. And
yeah, I wouldn't count on that.
No, I'm curious, what do you think about Bitcoin? Because personally, I've been like trying to save everything in that, just because I feel like I'm not counting on Social Security. I'd rather hold my own keys. I'd rather hold my own wealth in something where it's more responsibility. But at least I know that it can't be the base. At least it hasn't to this point, 13 years later. And
yeah. I mean, I'm still like a total fucking neophyte when it comes to cryptocurrency. But I'm seeing, like, wasn't it just like Odell Beckham just recently got his like contract paid out in Bitcoin and things like that. People seem to be under the impression that if they like, Bitcoin is a great means of kind of securing financial autonomy, regardless of what the dollar might do, and that's a great way of like kind of counteracting inflation of the dollar. But as far as I it's still just hard for me to see, because like the most classic objection is like, okay, what is it backed by? And then you can have the counter argument to where, okay, what is the US dollar backed by? We've been off the gold standard for a long time now. And so I don't know. I mean, it's just I can't really shake the kind of uneasiness about how precarious that currency appears to be. And I don't know how it's been doing lately. But I think it's becoming an increasingly attractive option for like investors widespread and things like that. But I think there's also a great deal of fucking apprehension and anxiety about blockchain shit and cryptocurrency and whatever the fuck. But I hope we're long enough. I hope we're alive long enough to see where this goes, if there is an endpoint to it.
Yeah, understandably. And there is reason. I mean, like, I think it's important to separate Bitcoin from all other cryptocurrencies. And I think there's still a lot of scams out there. There's a lot of ways, if you don't protect your private keys, you can get hacked on a personal level. But how would you answer that question? What is fiat? Since, like you said, we've been off the gold standard since 71. What do you think fiat's backed by? And what do you think Bitcoin's backed by?
I mean, again, I'm speaking totally uninformed here, but I would think it seems to be backed by fucking public perception. It seems to be backed by like public strength and like investment solidarity. It seems to be almost like subject to like these very fickle kind of like market forces. Where I wouldn't call it like FOMO or anything like that, but it seems like it's like at one point it was a total fucking runaway train and everybody was trying to step over one another to get on board and things like that. But if I had to say it, I guess I would say that they're, I mean, but and that's not to discount like the very real regulatory and environmental, social, political forces that might affect how the currency does. And I don't know to what extent Bitcoin is susceptible to market regulation and things like that. I still don't know very much about it, but I guess one of the large sources of backing that I see it as is literal like public taste, like popularity, and things like that, I guess. But I don't fucking know.
No, man. I think everything you just said is what determines the spot price of Bitcoin. So if you think about it, like Bitcoin speculation is its biggest marketer. The fact that like you can put money in this thing, and if you zoom out and it's going to be up a bunch, it's like,
Yeah.
damn, and I think looking into it, a lot of people kind of learn to set their time preferences a lot longer, which I think is a positive thing in general. You know,
Mhm.
good societies have citizens who want to save and work towards a bigger goal.
Totally.
And I'm no expert either. I don't work in finance, but as I understand it, all fiat currencies are just backed by the monopoly the government has on violence. Like the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, the fact that we got the biggest military in the world, is
Okay.
what backs
Okay.
the U.S. dollars,
Okay.
and that's what backs any fiat currency. I mean, you think about it, it's like, and there's all different kinds of central banks and stuff, but it really is the fact that like a government has monopoly on violence and they got a military, and they deem this currency like worthy. But I feel like a lot of things get messed up because we've allowed the government to print so much money and do fractional reserve banking where, you know, they lend out your money for a profit. And um, Bitcoin, as I understand it from looking into it, is essentially secured by energy. And there's been a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt spread that, oh, Bitcoin uses too much energy, all these ESG concerns.
Yeah.
But it's bullshit, because it is like, it is bullshit, because Bitcoin actually encourages green energy infrastructure. Think about it like, say you wanted to build some infrastructure to monetize some geothermal energy in Iceland.
Mhm.
It would cost millions, if not billions of dollars to build out that infrastructure to bring power to whatever cities there are in Iceland or whatever. But with Bitcoin mining, you can, like, the second you harness that geothermal energy into electricity, you can plug it into the internet, you know, a miner, start mining Bitcoin, and then essentially monetize that energy infrastructure you just built. And then you can start to build that out even more. So it really de-risks building
I
out.
see.
So
Okay.
in El Salvador, for example, they're using volcano energy. They're making a Bitcoin city,
Oh
and
shit.
and they're literally using geothermal energy to mine Bitcoin. So they're monetizing that geothermal energy, which is like as Bitcoin miners look for the cheapest form of energy, and then they're also going to use that geothermal energy to power their grid. So they're literally building out the city, and then they're raising funds, selling a Bitcoin-backed bond. Um, Mad props to El Salvador becoming the first nation state to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. And it's just, I think you're right. The public perception, like, a lot needs to happen for Bitcoin to become the next global reserve currency. But
Mhm.
I think Bitcoin as the next global reserve currency is such a better system than the US dollar, because unlike now where the Fed decides whether it's going to do quantitative easing or quantitative tightening, which is more or less, I know there's more to it than this, but it's more or less them deciding to print money or turn off the money printer and shrink their balance sheet, sell off their assets.
Yeah.
And rather than centrally planning the cost of money and all these different things, like how much will be printed, Bitcoin is just an open protocol anyone can use. It doesn't give a shit if you're fat, ugly, beautiful,
Yeah.
what your religion. It doesn't care about any of that. It just does what the code says it's going to do. And Bitcoin is truly decentralized. The creator Satoshi Nakamoto, whether it's one person or a group of people, has just disappeared and no one knows. And I think every other blockchain can't say the same. It's susceptible to, at some point, centralization. And I think that's what kind of I think humans are much better off when they don't aren't getting ruled from the top down, but rather people can flourish and optimize for what they want. And it kind of goes back to the conversation at the beginning of this. It's so much easier to read when I'm reading something I'm interested in and I'm doing things I'm passionate about than if I'm working a 9 to 5 or if I'm reading a book because it's mandated by my teacher or whatever, and I'm being forced. It's not like, but
coerced, lightly. But I think that's fascinating. What you said earlier, that kind of like back to like monopolization of violence and maybe like military might and power. I think that's something I hadn't considered. I think that's really interesting. But as a counterexample, this is like this might be absurd. I don't really know, but I've been watching the show Billions. It's okay. It's pretty good. The first few seasons were great, but I watched an episode. I'm on the last season. There was an episode. It was maybe 1 or 2, and one of something that happens is these guys are mining cryptocurrency. They're mining Bitcoin, and in the process, they apparently use so much energy off of the grid that this small town that they're next to has to go to the market and buy energy at 10 times the rate, or something like that. And I don't know. It seems really bad, but until you said that, I would have just kind of like accepted it at face value, or kind of been like, okay, that seems fucked, but I don't really know. But is that not not very realistic?
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, who the hell? That's why ESG, or like environment, societal government, is honestly, in my opinion, a bunch of bullshit, because it's like, who the hell decides what is good energy usage? Like, Christmas lights use more energy than the Bitcoin network. Like, I'm not sure. I like Christmas lights, but I'm saying, like, to just arbitrarily say, oh, people can use energy, and then to come out with carbon credits to allow companies like, oh, looks like I've exceeded how much carbon I can use. I'm going to need to buy some carbon credits. If you're a big enough company, it's no problem. You buy some more carbon credits, you pollute the environment more. And at least with Bitcoin mining, people are incentivized, because it just comes down to incentive structures. They're incentivized to look for the cheapest possible energy, because it's proof of work mining. Like, what's happening is you have to buy specialized hardware at this point, and they're just trying to hash a function, guess an answer. And when they get it, they can add a block to the blockchain, which contains all these transactions. And that's all it is, just blocks with transactions being added into the proof of work. The miners are exerting energy, showing they did it. And it's very random. I think, like, these specific machines, I think it's like billions of a hash functions they're guessing every second, like a crazy number. It's like you literally have to buy the specialized hardware. But so many people are like, oh, let's go to this proof of stake system. And proof of stake just leads to centralization. And they're like, well, it uses less energy. But it's like, well, the fact that Bitcoin is using all this energy to make sure it's secure over the course of time, and energy use is like, it creates for better human life. Like, think about how many things, at least being a citizen of the United States, we take for granted, but that make our life so much better. The fact that, we have electricity, the internet, running water, like, so many of these things come from, energy. Like, energy is everything. And some people try and shame the Bitcoin network for it and make it seem bad. And like, I'm sure, like, if you got enough miners, enough ASICs is what they're called.
Oh, okay. Wait. So how do you? What is it again?
ASIC, application specific interface computer. I could be wrong on that, but it's essentially a specialized piece of hardware that just guesses hash functions. And as I understand it, a hash function is like, if you put the input is just a piece of data, so it could be X, Y, 2, like whatever. And when it goes through that hash function, it randomizes it and scrambles it. And then it can only go one way though. So it's like, that's what encryption is. And Bitcoin is like a truly decentralized form where this blockchain, like, everyone has to be consensus. It's proof of work, and all these other proof of stake, like this Web3, and there's some cool things I see on it, but like, I mean, it's pretty nuts that that JPEGs are selling for millions. But I mean, I guess you could say the same thing about the art market before NFTs were a thing. Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, I'm not shitting. Like I said, I like some NFTs, but I think a reason a lot of these JPEGs are selling for so much is because it's like, there's funny money in the economy. There's so much misallocation of capital, and I mean, like 7 trillion since this, and they did it. They're like, oh, there's an emergency. We got to do this. We got to print. Like, and I'm sure they did. Like, I'm sure the bubble would have popped or whatever, the debt bubble. But when capital gets this misallocated and it's not open, transparent, and society can in not every, but like in 99.999% of cases, I feel like the private market does a much better job of allocating capital than a bunch of bureaucrats in a room trying to.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think you're right about that. I gotta ask. This is a wildly digressing, but when's the last time you had to take a drug test?
I think when my dad gave me one.
Oh man, it's been a long time. Okay.
Yeah. Why you
ask? I gotta take one tomorrow. And I'm not really sure what to do because I got this job teaching at Bowles, and it's a great fucking gig. I'm teaching like 9th to 10th grade history, and they're gonna pay me fucking $200 a day. And just for comparison, it's like if I were to sub at thank you, but if I were to sub at Stanton, they'd pay me like $84 a day, and it's like okay, I can't. But so the offer is contingent on a quote unquote satisfactory drug test, whatever the fuck that means. So I've been off weed for probably this is like the 7th day. But I have virtually like I'm skinny as fuck. My metabolism's through the fucking roof. And I'm trying to figure out what I mean, I have an at-home test I'm about to take tonight just to see what happens, but I'm kind of wondering what the fuck to do.
I would drink a ton of water.
I mean, dude, I've researched this to death. And right now, because on the one hand, I could just be like, hey, I've been living in Colorado the last 3 years, and like there was so much secondhand smoke, I just couldn't avoid. But on the other hand, I could dilute it if I like take like B12 and fucking creatine. I can colorize it.
If it was diluted and they say like, oh, you got to take another test, well, then that's even more time. Like it'd be a week. Like I'll take another. Also, start peeing and then put the cup in, and then
right, yeah, middle of the stream, yes sir, middle of the stream. That's right. But I was also going to think like maybe I could just say like I've been exposed to COVID and I don't know, so I was just curious if you dealt with that lately. But did you pass the one you took last?
I think it was inconclusive. I was doing the same thing, I'm sure, back then.
All right. Well, believe it or not, Nick might have to give me some clean beef, so we'll see what happens.
That's funny though, you mentioned that, like the difference between what a private and public school would pay you. And my girlfriend is actually working the public school system. We were talking about that today, how it's like private school teachers typically make more, and anyone who works at a private school typically makes more. And it can be frustrating, I'm sure, for many taxpayers, because it's like, well, I'm paying all these taxes to the state. Like, why is the education system and I feel like the teachers are between a rock and a hard place because they've given all these kids, and in a lot of cases, like you don't know the backgrounds they're coming from, what they're dealing with at home.
Yeah,
and you've got to try and all bring them together and teach them like a lesson and make it interesting to them. And at that age, man, so many kids want to optimize for different things, and rightfully so. So many kids have different skills and various things. You can probably test to it much better. I know you're a teacher than I can.
I've wondered about this because I know up until, at least in the state of Florida, I know up until DeSantis passed that recent legislation where he upped like the starting salary for new teachers. Before that, I think it was by and large the case that private school teachers made on average far more than public school. But from what I understand now, I don't think if this like sub discrepancy is any indication, it's obviously pretty bad. But from what I understand, I thought the gap wasn't quite as big as I thought it was, but maybe that's just a Florida thing. And I think it definitely speaks to a much wider problem because even teachers like that have been in the public school system, even at Stanton for 20, 30 years, are just about at the end of the rope dealing with fucking parents. It's really the fucking parents that do it to you, I think. But I don't know. I think if you can get a private school job, I think it is definitely a better idea. But for me, I think it's the most attractive part about it is like you're not bound to state curriculum. You have much more flexibility in what you teach and how you teach it. And I mean, you can't put a price tag on that, really.
No, man. I mean, even as a teacher, like I know I get such a kick out of talking about Bitcoin because like I'm passionate, I've studied it and tried to learn about it. And I'm sure it's the same way with anything you're going to teach. Like if you get on a subject that like, and then it's better for everyone involved, man. The students are like, they can hear the passion in your voice. They want to listen to what you have to say. It's
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, it's weird. They definitely have. They're like very attuned. They can tell like very easily like whether or not you give a fuck about what you're teaching. And what I wasn't saying, I didn't bullshit them at all. So like I would just like skip the poetry unit because I didn't give a fuck about it. But like the short stories and the other stuff, I was like very into, and I think that pays dividends in the long run. So
I think kids, especially growing up, like teenagers, have some of the best bullshit detectors, and like you said, can tell. It's such like, and it's amazing too. As a lot of adults get older, I feel like we kind of lose that spark or that joy, and
yep.
we put too many of our preconceived biases or notions about how society functions onto things. Um, it can be sad because I think a lot of people can almost become like zombies, just going through their days, not really um, especially when, not to always bring it back, but like when just the money gets corrupted and we're just seeing inflation be so high and so many jobs are unsustainable and just not being paid enough. And
Yeah, it's almost. I mean, with like the listening thing, it's like almost like an unconscious like kind of thing. Like the students will mirror your level of energy to the material, whether or not they realize it or not. So, if you can, yeah, I don't know. You really got to pick your battles with fucking education and curriculum. But if you're in public school, you don't always have a choice.
yeah, let me ask, what are you doing to optimize for like happiness in your own life in this increasingly clown world, or at least from what I'm seeing on social media?
Um, happiness. Well, I think every time I get off weed, this is like, I mean, on the seventh day, your like neuronal receptors kind of reset, and like you have kind of like a new lease on life for like a month or so. But so that's been something I always like take for granted. But also, uh, totally abstaining from romantic engagement and kind of withdrawing from even like social engagement, not like investing energy in that type of shit. I think is profoundly difficult, but it also can be like wildly rewarding because 9 times out of 10, uh, it usually doesn't pay off very well. But I also am like wildly. It's definitely a double-edged sword. It's just like kind of competing with kind of like biological urge and need versus, I guess, like over intellectualizing the pursuit of those types of things. But to optimize happiness, I don't fucking know. I think the best thing you can do to optimize happiness is kind of dispel the notion of any kind of need to optimize happiness. You just kind of go for it.
Yeah, I would love to know why you're kind of recently trying to stay solo, I guess. And before you answer, one thing I was talking about with my buddy Q in a podcast actually the other day is how important it is to learn to love yourself. And if you ever want to be in a successful, I mean, I know it's cliche as fuck, but if
Yeah.
you ever want to be in a successful romantic relationship, knowing yourself and understanding your wants and needs and like what you are going to expect out of a partner is crucial to have
Yeah.
long-term success. And I think in today's society, it's becoming ever increasingly damn near impossible to know yourself and really love yourself and think highly of yourself when it's so easy to see the next best thing 24/7, 365 on social media.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Totally. And I mean, this speaks to like the conversation we've been having, and it's just like you're always getting sold a better version, something you don't have it's just within reach. If you just want to fork up the fucking money or change your behavior or something like that. But in terms of relationships and partners and things like that, it's super hard to actually engage in once you start thinking way too much, because you're absolutely right in saying that like if you're going to set yourself up for a long-term like kind of mutualistic productive relationship, or are getting into whatever you think would be a mutualistic productive relationship, it requires fucking patience and a lot of time, but there's definitely a limit on those things. So I guess resisting biological programming is your best bet. But I mean, it's like you kind of gotta like shift your conception of what happiness is, and even like self-understanding and self-help, or like maintaining a positive self-image, or quote unquote loving yourself, is almost impossible to do. Well, actually, I don't even know about this, because on the one hand, I think I would say it's damn near in reality impossible to do if you actually don't have that underlying kind of foundational knowledge of yourself. But if you're lacking that knowledge, on the other hand, if you're lacking that knowledge completely, it is a wildly easy thing to quote unquote love yourself if you just completely turn off the introspective gaze and stop inquiring, and actually like pursuing independently these kind of like these drives and things and feelings and emotions that make us human. It's I don't know. It's fucked.
Man, I agree with everything. I think if there was one thing I took away from Atlas Shrugged, it's like my own happiness is dependent on myself, and it is fucked up to try and depend on someone else for your happiness. And everyone needs to optimize for their own thing. And in a way, ignorance is bliss, but at the same time, I think a lot of like true happiness and like true like kind of comes from learning to delay satisfactions and really think long term, think long time preference, and introspect so you can get to know yourself better and understand what's going to bring you those long term and sustainable joys and highs, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, if you can get behind desire, if you can start figuring out, why you're drawn to the things that you are, and then kind of like evaluate those things in the greater context of your life trajectory or whatever the fuck, it's it can be a productive thing, but it can also be kind of scary. It can be kind of empty. But anyway.
No doubt. I mean, I think like you said, with weed and with alcohol, with really any drug, really, I think so much of addiction, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not an expert, but as I understand, I think so much of it stems more from like a deeper trauma or something that kind of happened in life, and people turn to alcohol or drugs to try and like escape it. And getting off those things, it really makes you feel and introspect, and it's hard. And it's hard to so many people. I read a book, I forget what it's called, but someone was an alcoholic and getting off it, and she talked about like how so many people drink to just keep the wheels lubricated and keep things, and you get off and you're confronted with all these emotions, and working through them is the right thing to do in the long run. But you got to take the hard, tenuous path of stopping and stopping the drug or alcohol and working through them.
Yeah, actually, developing the fucking skill to like actually listen is to yourself, and also those kind of implicit kind of signs from other people around you, regardless of how reliable those might be, is super important. And I think it's so often the case that you come across people where it's like it becomes very evident that whether through substance abuse or something like that, and I'm not vilifying substance abuse here by any means. I think it can be a short-term solution to a long-term problem. I don't think there's much wrong with that. But on the other hand, there's even with something like as seemingly innocuous as weed, for example, it's like you can dull your like emotional like acuity and intelligence to such an extent where you don't develop like the like very foundational like emotional skills and communicative skills you need to actually like maintain a sense of well-being. And whether or not that's illusion, whatever the fuck, it doesn't matter. But I don't know, some people never really get past that. Like, I don't know, it's regulating emotion is really hard, and substances make it a lot harder.
It is. And I think a lot of it too is Western pharmacy. And rather than like trying to diagnose a kid, sometimes we'll put them on Adderall or various other things. And
yes,
that's not the answer in so many cases. Like it's really a shame.
I agree.
Well, Alex, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on. I always like to end these, as you probably know, by opening the floor so you can ask me a question about anything, something super personal or something very basic. And I also got a question here written down. You want to go first? You want me to go?
You can go first.
All right. So I guess this question isn't as relevant since you've been taking some time off Twitter, but I really like your Twitter bio, and I'm curious what your Twitter bio says, illuminated by diminishing light. I'm curious what that means to you.
So that's man, this all sounds like incredibly fucking gay, but that's that's a quote from Jean-Paul Sartre's Nausea, and that's kind of about a guy who is becoming like increasingly aware of the emptiness of perception and kind of like the emptiness of being itself. So it's kind of like this. The main character's name is Roquinton, and he's basically gradually dissociating. And like he picks up a rock And it's kind of like him kind of detaching language and meaning from the actual object that he's holding itself. And he goes so far down that path that it's somewhat ruinous for him. So I guess that quote is kind of it's like it's whatever this internal animating force is that kind of keeps you within the symbolic chain and keeps you within this, or keeps you content within the symbolic chain of language. That's kind of like very gradually going out. There's a light, but it's diminishing, I think. But I think that's natural as everyone ages. But my question to you, I think, would be, what is there something specific or maybe something challenging that you have in mind that you want to tackle in the future, some subject that you'd like to become more knowledgeable about that isn't related to finance or Bitcoin or money or something like that?
Well, you took
And
mine.
if there isn't, that's totally.
I love comedy, man. I love laughing. Like we talked about, like I think people's sense of humor, like in a woman, I think that is what I am most attracted to. Like being able to laugh is just such an incredible part of human experience. And I haven't been bold enough to go to an open mic yet, but I kind of love to work towards that and continue to incorporate comedy in this. Cause like, when I read you that white pill thing, we were cracking up in this, like, it's amazing how good you feel when you laugh with others. And like, there's so much to be sad and upset about in this world. But at the end of the day, we got to get on and live our lives and figure out and optimize for our own happiness. And Bitcoin's great and all, and I think it can provide a lot of freedoms. But like, if shit just absolutely hits the fan, Bitcoin's not getting me through. Well, I think having a sense of humor and like hope and being able to laugh and connect with other humans, that if everything hits the fan, like the internet goes out, like there's no, like money just isn't, money's worthless. Like food is basically the only commodity. If like we get to that point, like laughter is the only thing that would ever get society back to a prosperous state. It wouldn't be Bitcoin, unfortunately. So I think just optimizing for that and continuing to incorporate that. And I think another thing, like one of the biggest challenges to Bitcoin is that learning curve and getting people to realize, like, hey, the mainstream media has a lot to lose, and that's why they're spreading this FUD about Bitcoin. But in reality, like, if you can teach people and make it light and fun and help them understand in a way that is enjoyable, I think a lot of people are. There's very few people who I think understand Bitcoin, and there are some, but very few who understand Bitcoin and are like, screw this. I like this fiat system where the government gets to centrally plan money. Like Bitcoin is the first time as humans we've ever separated money from the state. And like, that's a pretty crazy concept. And the fact that we lived through it. And, that is one thing I'm so grateful for, that some anonymous character, a group of people got together and coded up something that the world can now use as a, inflation hedge in a way to opt out, if you will,
totally. Yeah.
Set our rails off the bullshit that is fiat currency.
It is cool. But I think that's great. I think laughter, especially resonant laughter, is very liberating. It's very freeing, even if it's only momentary. And I think, speaking to your point, that's like a fucking fantastic way to educate. It's like you can educate the best when like what you're doing isn't perceived as didactic or educational, and laughter is a great way to do it. So that's awesome. You should totally go for the open mic, man. Start writing shit down.
Hey, cheers. Nah, I think I'm going to try. Yeah. Hell yeah.
Why not, man? Why not?
What do I got to lose? A bunch of people telling me to go fuck myself. I can find that on the internet anywhere.
Yeah. That's everywhere. But thanks for having me on, man. I really enjoyed talking to you today.
Hey, likewise, Alex. Glad to have you back on. Thanks to anyone who took the time to listen today.
All right, man. Take it easy.
Likewise, Alex. Peace, brother.